What's up, Embody? Today on the Yours Truly podcast, I have Timothy Krell in the virtual studio. I first bumped into Timothy at the Symbolic World Summit. I had just introduced myself to Ruslan KD and from John from What Do You Meme on the last day's morning session. As I sometimes do, I took a risk and invited myself to sit next to them and thought, wow, I'm sitting next to these two big YouTubers. Right as I sat down and was getting situated, I looked to my right and the person sitting next to me. He looked at me and his eyes brightened and he said, wow, I'm going to sit next to Christian Baxter. It was a surreal moment as a person was happy to sit next to me as I was happy to sit next to those big dogs on YouTube. This person was Timothy Krell. I was flattered and shocked as this YouTube thing was continuing to create surprises in my life. I asked Tim a little about himself as the session was about to begin. He told me that he was a Protestant monk from New Jersey. I immediately thought, I've never heard of such a thing. He then told me their monastery had been making efforts to increase their visibility online. I took down his information and told him I'd love to hear more and have him on my podcast. Tim's Twitter description reads, taking the Benedict option since 1991, software engineer, living in a Protestant monastic community, member of lifemission.org, Web3, crypto, UX. I'm excited to see where this conversation takes us today. So, without further delay, I give you Timothy Krell. Hi, this is Christian Baxter, and you're listening to Yours Truly, a place we go to think out loud. And we're recording. What's up, Timothy? Tim.
Hey, how's it going? Yeah, you can call me Tim.
Tim. Man, I'm good. How have you been since Symbolic World?
Oh, it's been great. Yeah. I loved the conference, and it was a really blast going to. I mean, it was almost like there almost wasn't enough of it, like I particularly wanted more time to meet with people too. Like it just felt like there's too many interesting people to talk to.
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, it's been great. Still thinking about a lot of those conferences. I need to go back through the recorded videos and rewatch some of them, because I still haven't checked out the ones from the alternate track. My wife and we split up to kind of cover more ground, but some of those other ones that she was at sounded really good as well. So
did you go to Neil deGrade's, or did you go to, or what track did you do?
I did Neil deGrade, so that was like the artist track or whatever. Yeah.
I was searching on your Twitter, and it looks like were you a Dirt Poor Robins fan before, or was that something you discovered when you got there?
No, I was before, but I mean, newly minted. Like I really only got into them I don't know, last fall or so. I think it's funny because I had been following Pajot for a while, and I had seen him tweeting out stuff about Dirt Poor Robins, and I just didn't check them out. It was around when they were, I think I first became aware of them when they released their Queen of the Night album and movie or whatever, silent film, and I saw it and I was like, I don't know. There's so many Christian art stuff that's just kind of low quality sometimes.
Yeah.
And so I just kind of looked at it. I was like, I don't know. I'll check it out. I didn't, it was like Pajot was recommending it. You kind of don't want to look at it because you think you might not like it kind of thing, And so, and then they started releasing stuff for Firebird, whenever that was. And then I started listening. And I was like, holy cow, this is really, really good, and I think they've since supplanted my previous favorite band and have become my favorite band of all time so far. So
really,
yeah,
that's big. Favorite band.
Yeah.
Who was your previous favorite band?
Jars of Clay. I really like.
Wow, dethroned Jars of Clay.
Yeah, goodness. I know. I mean, I would still really like Jars of Clay, obviously, but I don't know, the depth of symbolism and deep thought that's in Dirt Poor Robin's lyrics, and then add to that just the amazing musical compositions, just really yeah, I don't know. I just find it remarkable and
Oh, that's
uh,
cool.
worthwhile meditating on those lyrics and everything.
Well, it's been a long time since Jars of Clay's done anything, I think.
I know. Yeah. Yeah. They haven't released an album in a long time.
So, I guess from your perspective, how do you think we got to this conversation here today? Kind
Yeah.
of
It's
big picture.
interesting because I mean, we met at Symbolic World, which was really fun because there's like a lot of different people that I really wanted to meet at the conference, and you were definitely on my list because I just been enjoying watching your videos. And the you know I kind of found you through Paul Vanderklay and the Little Corner, becoming aware of that. Um, and I just been enjoying all that material that you've been putting out, other people have been putting out. Um, but going to the Symbolic World Conference specifically, I'd been really getting into a lot of the symbolism material for. So wow, there's a lot.
Oh, yeah.
The path to here.
Unpack it.
There's a lot of backstory, but we'll probably get into it more. But as you introduced, I'm part of a Protestant monastic order. So one of the things we do in our Sunday services is we have what we call an arts and culture time, where we take some time to present various arts and culture, to learn more about our rich Christian history and appreciation of the arts. Um, and so we usually have a segment. It's usually around 10 to 15 minutes in the middle of the service that we do that. There's all sorts of different things. Like my sister will do artwork. My wife do musical presentations, talk about classical music or other Christian, like Bach or canticles, things like that. One of us does book reviews, theology, and other different things. One of the things I used to do, my brother does Shakespeare plays. He's been doing a whole series on that. So we've been getting like kind of an education on those. And one thing I used to do was poetry. So I would do poetry presentations and everything. But I've been getting into all the Pajot stuff, Jordan Peterson, obviously, right? But just Jonathan Pajot's way of looking at, his symbolic world was really remarkable. And I found extremely helpful of understanding what we've been doing in our life together a lot, because just that understanding that symbolism isn't like a layer on top that you just add to, like there's the real world, and then we take symbolism and it's just metaphors and it just kind of helps us understand what's going on. But as I was going through Jonathan Pajot's work and then reading his book, I don't know how to pronounce his brother's name. Mathieu. I don't know, like when Pajot says it sounds like Mathieu. I don't know. It's I'm not sure. But Matthew Pajot, reading his book was really, really just insightful to me, of just seeing like, no, like the fundamental existence in reality is symbolism, and there's all these patterns there that make up the cosmos and reality fundamentally of why things are the way they are. And so I wanted to share that with, my congregation, because I thought, a lot of that thinking was in line with where, things we've been talking about in theology, and just like practical discipleship. It really adds a whole nother layer of like realizing, oh, there's a reason to clean the dishes, like there's a reason to make your bed, like these things, there's something spiritual going on there when you are doing these mundane things that the world is constantly trying to tell you, oh, that's just like the silly mundane stuff that you are trying to get past to get to the real good stuff of, I don't know, entertainment and consumerism or something.
Mm.
And so so I was excited to share that. And my dad is our abbot. So I've been talking to him about the material and how I was finding it really helpful. And so he suggested I do, instead of my poetry presentations, maybe switch to doing some symbolism stuff. So I've been doing a whole series teaching the symbolism stuff during that arts and culture time on Sunday, taking a lot of stuff from Pajot, from his brother's book, the Language of Creation, and then other material around too that is connected. Um, and so then this conference came up, the symbolic work conference. I was like, maybe we should go to that. That would be pretty cool. And so we talked about it, and I got some time off work, and everyone, my dad and others all thought, yeah, this seems like a good thing. Let's go to it and see what that's like. And so we ordered tickets and we flew out, and then
Yeah.
you and I met, like you
Briefly.
described in the intro there. And I was at what talk were we at? Was that
I feel like it was the last morning session,
was that
yeah.
Vesper Stamper? Was it Vesper Stamper's
Yeah,
talk?
actually, I think it was. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Awesome.
That was a really good talk. Um, but yeah, so and we had been there's just so many people to see, and my one critique of the conference, I'd say, is I wish there was a little bit more thought and put into how to get people to meet and talk to each other. Like there wasn't as much affordance, I felt like, for that. um but I sat down and I looked over and it was you, and I was like, oh, I get to sit behind Christian Baxter. That's great. So that was really cool, and there's a lot of fun, I don't know, interactions.
Yeah, there were.
uh but so that's how we came to be here. It was
So
long-winded.
this is yeah, well, that's okay. I mean, it's kind of interesting. Like, how do these things happen? How do these things converge? And
Yeah,
Jonathan Peugeot is a big um, key. You of course you mentioned Peterson as being kind of preliminary to that, and then Paul Vanderklay is how. If you were going to see me, it had to have been through Paul Vanderklay, because
yeah,
he was highlighting
yeah,
some of my stuff a little bit, and yeah, so that makes sense. And so a couple of things there in kind of that story um, is so yeah. Let's talk about where you're at and what you're doing. It sounds like it's been a family affair, as you mentioned, brothers and sisters, and your dad, and so like how did and then um, yeah. So how did this all come into being? What you're
yeah.
doing, what you're part of? I'm gonna let
So
you
my
handle all
my
of
family is here. I wouldn't call it a family affair. I'd call it more a family of God affair.
it. Okay,
The Because we are. I mean, I don't know. Would it be helpful if I explained like what we are exactly, or
yeah,
gave some overview of that, because that might be helpful. But
sure.
so like we said, we're a Protestant monastic order. Um, so what that means practically is we all live on the same property. So we have several apartment buildings, and so there's different apartments that different families live in. And we have a shared order of the day. So we have like the way I like to think of it, I start my day and end my day with my brothers and sisters in my church, right? So in the mornings we have morning devotions. Now, not everyone can go to those. There's some people have different work schedules and stuff, but mostly we try to get there as much as possible. And then there's just a bunch of people who aren't going out to work necessarily, who are more on the property and are there more regularly. But so we have the morning devotions time where we read scripture together. We usually sing music, pray. We have a common prayer list that we go through as well every morning, and we pray for our extended families and other topical things that have come up. Um, and then that's the start of our morning. And then we have shared meals. So there's often shared lunches, and then shared dinners as well. We all come together uh, to have a common meal, and we read scripture at that time. We sing music at the start and the end. We have different traditions. We just started, since it's Easter, we have this very celebratory song that we sing at the end of dinners, which is very fun, where we all stand up and proclaim that Lord Jesus Christ is risen. It's very fun. Um, and then we end our day that way. So like it's basically shared life, right? Like we try to integrate our lives with each other as much as possible. So one of the things that we early on realized is we don't have our own cars. We We have a shared pool of cars that we all have to negotiate and sign out and manage together. Different practices like that. And then, of course, like the biggest one, and perhaps the most radical one that might be surprising people, is that we have a shared common purse, like, you know, the early Christians and second chapter of Acts and everything, right, where they held all in common. So yeah, we have we're a common purse community. We have a covenant community. So we, you know, when you become a part of our fellowship, you sign a covenant and everything. So that's, and we have a shared business as well. So a bunch of people work at the business. It's a window cleaning and pressure washing company. And yeah, it's completely integrated life together. So that's what our Protestant monastic order is.
So, I mean, that makes me think of a couple of things, but one of Peugeot's bigger projects or messages has been the disordered life. You know, like this idea that our lives are so segmented, you know, and so isolated and individualized that it's broken. That's part of the breakdown of society or something.
Yeah.
And so that's one thing that makes me think of. But so what's kind of the history of how this began, and what ties y'all to being Protestant?
So those are both good questions. They are linked as well. I don't know if I mentioned this too, but it's like we're about let's get the number off the top of my head, but it's like 6 families. Now there's a bunch of families that have had, you know, singles and couples like me and my wife who have you know, migrated into being their own families, sort of, you know. But it's like roughly 30 people altogether. But so what we started, the genesis of this was back in the early 90s, like 91, I think. And what we used to be was a missionary group. So it was a group for young people to come learn theology and learn, you know, the foundations of being a Christian, and then be energized and ready to go out into the world and evangelize, right? And so it was very evangelical, right? And that's kind of our background. And sometime my dad's gonna knock me for getting the year wrong, but I think it was like 90. I think in 1990, 91. I think it's 1991. There was a revival. So a bunch of them had been going through a lot of work from Charles Finney, and that Finney's power from on high material and other adjacent material sparked a revival here, where a lot of these people, and now you got to remember, like, my dad used to live in Ohio. He was a young guy. He could have gone anywhere. He could have gone to MIT. He was extremely smart. He wanted to go and become an elite missionary, you know, so that this was his, you know, thing. And a lot of the young people here, they were like not getting a lot of income. They had to get like pay their own way. They had to get support and all this stuff. So, you know, fairly extreme radical thing. They're really committed to studying all this stuff. But they had a revival, and a lot of them ended up realizing, I don't know that I've ever actually been a Christian. And they were realizing that they were in it for the wrong reasons, and also that they weren't really concerned with being the church. They were interested in mission. They were interested in spreading Christianity, but they didn't really know what it meant to be the church. And one of the ways this like was evident in their life was a bunch of them would go to different churches. You know, like they're all here spending the majority of their time like learning, studying, and preparing to be missionaries and being missionaries, going out and witnessing and everything. But when they come back, different people would go to different churches. And different people had different needs. There was some, you know, who maybe had more support from others, and some people who weren't able to raise as much support, and so they had less money and weren't able to, have as, certain resources to be able to do certain things. Or some people had cars and some people didn't, And so like there was this conviction that they had of like, why are we doing this? Like, these are my brothers and sisters. I should be living for them. And like, the church is an important thing. Like, what does that mean to be the church? And what did it look like in the early scriptures? Right. So that all of those thoughts were happening and sparking this revival where people were feeling convicted and saying, I've got to fully give my life to Christ. I've got to lay everything down at his feet and fully follow him. Right. And the organization that they were part of at this time was not happy about the revival, which is odd. It's a Christian organization. You would think, oh, there's a revival. That's exciting. But it didn't go down like that. And sometimes that happens in revivals, right? Like, when someone's, it's a funny thing when sometimes when you realize, oh, I want to fully commit to Christ, and you're excited about that and telling, other people around you, suddenly it becomes well, are you saying I'm not following Christ? And you're like, no, I wasn't saying that at all. I'm saying I need to, but because there's this, there's that inner voice that sometimes people are not listening to or trying to suppress, and it gives rise to those thoughts, and like seeing someone else fully pursue God makes you start questioning, am I doing that? Right. So that kind of dynamic was happening during this revival. And the way the organization had been set up, they called them bases at the time. There was a lot of them all around, and we were one of them. But each base was autonomous. It would manage its own finances. It managed its own thing. And that was in their bylaws and everything. The broader organization tried to come in and kick them off the property. And because they were like, this is getting out of hand, we're afraid we're going to lose the property. They didn't really have any right to do that. And it ended up being this big drawn out court battle. It was quite dramatic. There was actually a point where there was a bunch of people like on the property, like with fires lit outside, and and there was actually some like physical intimidation that happened. So like this was like full on like persecution of these young people who had just had a revival, and they tried to take over certain buildings, and there's all these shenanigans that had to go on, and then a lengthy court battle. And it was during this time that they, my parents were part of the original core group, and there's others here who were as well, where they started realizing, okay, we need to form, be a body. And that's where they decided to join into this common purse. And it really meant a lot for them. Like, cause my mom at the time was a nurse, and she was making really good money, and it was this real practical, like pooling of all these resources. And then also to like help defend themselves against this real spiritual battle and opposition, which was trying to like squash this revival and these convictions of these young people, So that's the genesis of how this all started and why we're Protestant, because we came from this evangelical background. And it was from revival and from the I'm trying to think of the right word to say, but the crucible of persecution that our group was formed. And so and then led all the way to today. I think I was like 1 or 2 years old, or maybe 2 or 3 years old when this all went down. So I don't have vivid memories of it, to say, but I have memories of the aftermath of it and us like developing into the community that we are today. The other thing too that's interesting about like our evangelical background is we've kind of we've incorporated a lot more liturgical practices into our life together. And it does seem, I don't know, I only have a sample size of one, but something about the, living in a communal life like this does lend itself. Like there's a real, you really feel the need and the helpfulness of liturgical practice in order to um, form discipleship in your midst. So we've kind of moved towards high church stuff. Our background is evangelical. We probably like are closest to Anglican in some of our liturgical practices and some of our theology. But our roots are evangelical. So we
Mhm.
have kind of a nice mix. Like I lead worship, on our Sunday worship, along with my wife. She plays the piano and she pulls a lot of the music together. She's
Mhm.
very talented. But so we'll often have like praise songs and kind of more, I don't, like maybe vineyard music, or I don't know,
Yeah,
Chris Tomlin, like we'll have some of
sure.
those songs in there too. But we've also moved to like these chants and uh, like this Taze material that we'll do where there's like a call and response
Yeah,
and, and different things too. So we kind of try to get a bit of, you know, we're trying not to like, we have our roots in some of this more evangelical, maybe CCM kind of thing that speak to us too. But we also see the value of having that more high church and high kind of classical music and the tradition of all that. So we've tried to incorporate a lot of that in our life and worship and things too.
that's really fascinating. Kind of two things it brings to mind for me. One is I don't know how closely you're following stuff that I talk about, but I mean that's I was kind of involved, in an evangelical church. We ended up going more that direction with adding liturgy, and then I'm in a small house community kind of now doing even more
Yeah.
of the historical liturgy stuff. But I still play. It's me and my wife are playing songs on guitar, stuff that's pretty modern generally. I mean, some of it's not, some of it's older, some of it's retooled hymns and stuff. But um, that's interesting to me. The thing that kind of stands out is hearing the story in the Genesis is my initial inclination or my projection would have been that the community would have ended up being drawn more towards a type of, I don't know, um, well, I guess less open to like looking into the history of the like a more fuller history of the church. I think,
Yeah.
because sometimes you hear stories like that. It's like, oh, we want to isolate our ideas, or and it's like, oh, we want to expand these. And your dad or your father was saying, oh, this is interesting. So you go down to a Greek Orthodox, basically a Greek Orthodox conference.
Yeah. I think like 90% of everyone there
Yeah.
was Greek Orthodox, so it seemed
So,
like.
so I'm like, well, that's fascinating to me that it's that there's like a type of openness in the space that sometimes in other situations I think that would sound the same. And even the fact that you were mentioning like Charles Finney as being a part of that, that's old old town Baptist revival stuff, like which is what it seemed to like spur um, and evangelism, all those types of things, and that the turn it's kind of taken. I wonder if that was that kind of maybe going a different direction from the original organization? Was that part of that? What kind of
Some
aimed you guys at that a little bit?
Yeah. Um it was a little bit going in a different direction. I
Yeah,
think so all these different bases, it was kind of a neat setup in that you had these different groups all kind of trying to figure out this thing, of being missionaries and understanding theology together. And different ones kind of had different charismas, say, of, what their interests were in things. Ours at the time was a little bit more different than some of the other ones in that one of the things is we had this moral government of God material, which there's two men who were behind that who um, are no longer with us, sadly, but Gordon Olson and Harry Kahn. they introduced us this material, and that was very fundamental to our, like, a starting point and a basis for a lot of our theology and things. So and that kind of led to, because a lot of that came from some of Finney's systematic theology as well. So that we were already kind of a little bit like different than some of the other, groups and things. But there was very much these were schools for missionaries, essentially. So there was very much this understanding of, like, trying to find the right material and learn from. Another thing too, I don't know if you ever heard of Winky Pratney. He was I think he's from New Zealand, and he was a big missionary. Have you ever heard of Keith Green? Yeah. So Winky Pratney was good friends with Keith Green at the time too, and there's revivals that went on with that and everything. But he would come and he taught at our base here as well, and a lot of his material from his book Youth of Flame, which I'm taking some of our students through currently. It's really great material, but like one of his, like, even on the book Youth of Flame, he doesn't write written by Winky Pratney. He says collected and compiled by Winky Pratney, because there's this idea that's like, this isn't me. That I went and found, like what C.S. Lewis says about himself. Says, I'm just a beggar telling other beggars where I found bread, right? With Christianity. So that's what we all are, right? And so I think that some of those materials being foundational to us kind of put us in that mindset of, truth is outside of us, right? We don't have the truth. We are not the truth, right? There's only one person who's the truth. That's Christ, right? We have to go to truth. We aren't truth. And so, truth can come from anywhere, and we should be going and finding it, right? So I think that spirit being at the foundation there really opened us up to, saying we should see what other people are saying. We've explored a lot. Like, one of the things it feels like that Christ has led us to and has been real beneficial to us is that we've been able to pull from a lot of different traditions and find things. Like, we were on a Catholic kick there for a while and really studying all the Catholic stuff. And there's a big conference that's a little bit more economics oriented, but from Acton University. They're a big Catholic kind of think tank and organization. So we went to their conferences for a while, found a lot of good stuff that's been useful for us there. We looked at the Anglican stuff. We pull from a lot of like early Celtic Christian things, and some of how they lived also has been inspiration to us. Anabaptist, we pull a lot of, I think probably a lot of our ecclesiology is more Anabaptist, I'd say. So yeah, it's just been a blessing. I mean, it's certainly crossed our minds too, of like, oh, why don't you become Catholic? Why don't you become Orthodox or something? But every time we've thought about it, like, the Holy Spirit hasn't been leading us to do that, and there's something about the traditions that we have too that are very rich and important. And I mean, so far, I mean, maybe that's in our future too. I don't know, but we'll have to see what the Lord says. But at this point, like, I feel like we've really had a blessing of being able to be open and pull from all the richness of so many other people who are walking that path, and trying to understand how to be Christians and be the church,
I think that's beautiful. And it's interesting to hear you kind of walk through. Okay, we're mining things, and just yesterday, Paul released Paul Vanderklay. He released a stream from, like, Grail Country and from the conversation, and they were talking about, Sam Tiedemann was like, evangelicals are going to be really good at scooping up. They're really good at scooping up all the good things that seem to work and all these other things, and I was like, oh, that's something we're having this conversation the next day. I'm like, oh, wow. I've been a part of something similar to that. You're doing something similar to that. And not that may not end up landing maybe home or converting something into one of the historical traditions, like you mentioned. But which leads me to ask the next question of, because you talked about, preserving or richness of these traditions and still being Protestants. Like where do y'all land, like on? Because that you would have to cross over that threshold of sacramental theology. If you did, is that what's kind of held y'all back, or what's the rub there?
Well, there's a lot of different, yeah, but there's quite a few different things. It's kind of hard to point to just one thing, I'd say, but I think, okay, I'm going to go on a limb. I don't know. From my perspective, so it's interesting too. There's probably a lot to talk about here too. That's kind of interesting of me being a second generation person in this, because there's a lot of decisions that have been made before I was a member, right?
Mhm.
And when you join, those become your decisions, right? Even though you
Mm.
weren't part of those decisions,
Mm. I
and
think I hear what.
yeah. So like for some of these things, I think like I kind of accept those. I'm like, yeah, that made sense, but I wasn't there during the wrestling of certain things
Sure.
necessarily. So you kind of have to rediscover them for yourself. And there's a lot of interesting things to talk about there. But some elements of this are kind of fall into that category, right? The But like for a lot of it, I feel like there's a lot of different traditions that we really take a lot from, but I don't see a lot of them doing what we're doing here. Like,
Mhm.
and that's kind of, and I know, I'm like, both Orthodox and Catholics, and even Anglicans have the monastic ideas, but, and communities and things. But they're this other odd thing. And I think they should be a little bit more central. Like, I don't, and not necessarily like, I don't know that everyone, I don't think every church is necessarily like should be in a common purse or something. Although I don't think that would necessarily be a bad thing if they were. um, but I do think like what that's pointing at, right, is a deeper commitment
To
to the
trust.
people of God. And
Trust.
I was listening to your thing about trust, that live stream that you had too.
Yeah.
Like that's where trust comes from, right? Is your commitment to each other. Like, like in other words, when uh, there's people, right? There's personalities that do things that annoy me, right? That's shouldn't be a surprise. Everybody has that, right? I don't get to just check out when someone annoys me in my in my community here, right? Like I can't just go to a different church, right? Or I can't even just like make sure I only go to the service that I know, they're not at,
Mm.
or like I have to live with them, like I'm committed to them, right? I've signed a covenant with them. So that means that this ship has to float one way or another, right? And that means I have to figure, like how do I love them in this? Is this a failing on their part? Is this a failing on my part? Do I need to learn something, right? And that commitment holds you, forces you to be the church, to be a Christian to your brother, right? Um, and a lot of the structures around like like were I to go to an Orthodox church, that's the big question in my mind. It's like I do see like a lot of people say, oh, we're pretty close and everything, um and and the people in the church help each other. But then I also hear like, but the person at the church had a job on another state, and so they left,
Mm.
to go to the other job. Well, which one's more important to you, your job or the church that you're with, right? Like that really becomes the question. Were the people in that church that you're a part of, are you that committed to them that you will take a lesser pay to be with them, or is the church like, no, it's just the whole system. So I can be an Orthodox and go to church, in New Jersey. But if I have suddenly, I've got a big job in Silicon Valley, I'll just go to Silicon Valley and now have a big job there, and there's an Orthodox church there. I'll become a part of that church, right? That to me, it's not the same thing as what we're doing here, right? And what the Holy Spirit's called us to. So like, I think that's probably the biggest sticking point is I see pockets of it, and that's what excites me, because I feel like all the Pajot material really points to this idea, this embodied symbolic life, right?
Yeah, that was that ordered life I was hitting on.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what's exciting to me, because it feels so natural there, but yet sometimes it feels like people walk right up to it and don't quite go over that line of saying it's the people, right? And that's a big aspect that we've learned, because a lot of times, like there's a question that a lot of people will ask when they hear about the way we live, right? Especially evangelicals, I typically more than Catholic and Orthodox. So I think Catholic and Orthodox have a little bit better understanding this way, but like evangelicals, especially when you tell them, oh, we're living in a common Protestant monastic order thing, they'll say, well, what do you do? Right. And it's like, so, oh, do you run soup kitchens? Do you, like, in other words, what's your mission? Right. But to being the people of God is the mission, right? You bring people into that, and they see the kingdom of God on display, and that's what leads to conversion, right? Doing these other outside things, those can only come from if the inside is being the kingdom of God and being the people of God, right? And so that question of like, what do you do, is like it inherently has that kind of implicitly inside it, which is like, oh no, there's something else to do as the church, right? Other than be the church. There's the church is just a means to an end, right? Which is actually getting souls saved, or going out and being a missionary, or some such thing, being somewhere that you go on Sunday, to be spiritually renewed and filled.
I definitely resonate. Not that I'm living to the depth of that idea that you guys are, maybe aimed towards something closer. And the couple of ideas that come to my mind are these, if I can string them all together. Say, deepening of strength, moving back to home, and the rhythm of life. These things. So help me go there. Deepening in strength. One of my early conversations was with Jordan Hall, who's a deep thinker, successful Silicon Valley guy who recently became a Christian. We
had lunch with it, dinner with him, which was remarkable. It was really cool how it came about, because so we were blessed. We actually got to speak with him for a couple hours, which was really really
he's wide open, man.
He
in our conversation, talking about the future of civilization, that what's going to be required is a deepening of strength, and that can only really be found and made. Well, it has to start with the person, with God. It has to then start with like a family, and then like you're talking about, this community. And what you have is the ability to become deeply strong as a community.
Yes.
And being forced to confront difficult relationships, like a marriage, and I think that one of the guys that's helping with this group that we're meeting together, he actually was in a medieval studies a master's program before Katrina. He was down in Tulane, and then he wasn't able to finish the program. So he has this really interesting flavor from his studies and what he's interested in, and not stuff that most people in rural Arkansas are interested in. So I've got to explore that with him recently as we've been building this relationship. And he told me about one of the very small books, almost like an essay, that he read while he was in that program. They talked about the part of worship, historical church liturgy, the passing of the peace, which I don't know if you've seen that in liturgies and stuff, but it's sometimes it's just like the handshake time, or
Yep.
and he
We
was
do that in our Sundays, our services. Yeah.
He was saying that there was a time during the Reformation, probably because the Reformation wasn't just like a light switch, that all of a sudden every church was Protestant that was in a certain area. It was like, years of change and probably having to figure out how to have peace to be able to take communion together. That may have actually been one of the most deeply meaningful parts of the Mass during that time, was trying to reconcile relationships before partaking that, or that they actually that was actually their form of it, because maybe the priest was the only one taking the Mass at the time or something. But so that became their most spiritual practice. And that really stood out to me. I don't have the sources. I'd have to track all that down, but that is, you were touching on that, having to forge relational peace, as opposed to coming into a situation. Sometimes people make moves for jobs based off of soured relationships, not even money, and and then also the idea that's kind of an American dream idea of, go off and go do the best you can and go forge your way. And, we get some of that from the old frontier days, for better, for worse. And it's like, however, I have a friend who recently moved back to our hometown. It's like a town of around 10,000 people here in Arkansas, because he was listening to stuff about family. He was listening to stuff about community. And, he was working this kind of tech job down in Little Rock, and his family was an hour, and that he grew up with, like his sisters up here and their family, and his parents and his wife's parents are also from our hometown. And he just made the decision to move home, to reintegrate into that life and into that trust and into that community, and into family, into kinship.
Yeah.
And, it's not, again, that's not quite as deep as walking into a monastic lifestyle, but it's
aimed at the same thing,
the same thing.
Yeah.
And I was picking up on that as being a big part of some of the stuff Jordan Hall is actually talking about for the future. And then let's see, the third piece, I don't remember what I said, but strength, moving home. Maybe that was it. Maybe that was all three of them. And then the passing of the peace. And how, those are, again, I believe I had this idea too, but even before talking to him, it was like we came out of a broken church. Like it was a bad deal. And so this community of people that were kind of like, well, what are we going to do? And we decided to do Advent together, and, at a house. And, it's roughly the same size community that you have. And I just had the thought, like, I grew up Southern Baptist. I was part of this evangelical church plant. And the whole model was, go big and go grow and go, go do this. And it's, 1,000 miles wide, probably a few inches deep type thing, which I don't want to like completely just bash on that, because there's some things that are good about that, but
absolutely.
But I just had this sense, it's like with this community, regardless of what happens in the future, because I have no idea, I said I would do this thing for a year. And there's nobody's being paid or anything like that. It's just, this, and no one's trying to like evangelize. It's just this group that's trying to heal, but also I hope my only hope is that it grows strong,
Mm.
like the relationship through the worship, through the community, through integrating even this idea of, you were talking about the liturgical life, going all the way down into, like making your bed in the morning and sharing these meals. It's not obviously what we're doing, but this idea, even getting more in touch with the historical liturgical calendar, which is actually very
Yeah.
countercultural, and then trying to be more and more intentional with that, because it just centers it centers the community around, around Christ, around the gospel in a certain way that's not um, just a secular, 2 day a year version of that. So
Exactly. Yeah.
those
Yeah,
those
the
are my thoughts
the
on more
liturgical
so.
calendar has been really big for us too in that.
Cool.
Yeah, like, I think I'm trying to remember the years blend together, but I think it was, like, about 10 or probably 15 years ago where we started really emphasizing that, and, that's been, because you're going through that calendar with all these people that you share life with, and,
And church at large, global church.
yeah, yeah, exactly, and you're tied in with, like, one thing I really liked about, the Symbolic World Conference, I feel like there's this emphasis of, like, there's such a rich Christian history that we all have, and has been, like, to a large extent, forgotten or ignored, like, we have our own Christian myths, like,
Mhm.
and I think one of them was really encouraging of, like, yeah, like, tell the Christian stories, like, there's an appetite for that now, and we need, yeah. Um, and it's kind of interesting because, like, you see that in culture too, where there's, like, such a fascination with Eastern kind of culture and history and mythos and everything, right? And it's like, like somehow there's something richer there than what we have. And it's like, no, we actually have this amazing Christian mythology and history and tradition that's right there,
Yeah.
and if you go to Europe, like, we've traveled to Europe, my uh mom and dad have traveled quite a bit too. You go to like all the, it's everywhere, it's like it's in the architecture itself,
Yeah.
um and yeah, just wanting to reclaim that and realize, like, oh, it's all right there for the taking, I just have to learn about it.
Yeah, because you mentioned even the Celtic practices, and I had and obviously that was kind of this Martin Shaw bringing in
Yeah,
this idea. What he called himself, a sharnarchy or something like that, which was,
y-
that's like
yeah,
the Irish storyteller.
yeah,
And it's like, well, what is the Irish storyteller? Bringing that identity into smuggling Jesus into that, as Paul would say, something like, as a but that's kind of what's the beauty of what Christianity has been able to do. And
yeah,
and then the other piece of what you're talking about with, um, I've been thinking a lot about is, you mentioned that even the kingdom of God, so to speak, being built right into the architecture.
yeah,
I mean, that's a lofty goal, for just, regular Joe of people, and you see pieces of that when you go to a downtown in a small, even in larger cities. There's vestiges of that, but it's then just like swallowed by something else.
yeah,
and
yeah,
and then, even because you were saying we have this rich history, but there is that, even being in a Protestant framework of some kind, uh wrestling with the things that were thrown out or like condemned, and maybe for good reason, because abuses had crept corruption, these things were corrupted,
hmm, yeah,
but rediscovering them and hopefully being able to approach them, as they're meant to be, or something like that.
yeah.
So
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's, and like what you're saying about the architecture really hits home with me too, because like that's been a big focus of ours, like in the last couple years, especially,
Mm.
is wanting to make. We have a nice property. We keep it up. That's one of the things that a lot of people, when they come and visit us, is, they say like, "Oh, you have a beautiful property," because that to us that is a witness, right? Is the
Yes.
the keeping of these grounds and everything too. Um, but we realizing even more like like just that the nature of like a cathedral, right, and everything that goes in it. Well, that's one of the what we actually, for Sundays, we've been going through like this whole like great courses series. We just finished it of like on cathedrals and everything,
Oh, wow.
and watching that on Sundays.
Who taught it,
Um,
from what school?
uh, it's well, it's part of the, they're called Wondrium now. Great
Mm.
courses. I forget the name of the presenter, but you can like find it online or whatever. Um, but the like under seeing that, like, these communities would come together and build this church that had all their history, like one of um the cathedrals literally has like there's these oxen uh at the top of it, because there was this amazing thing when they were trying to build that tower, I think, or whatever. They didn't have enough oxen to like hold
Hoist. Yeah.
the hoist the things up, and these
Mhm.
oxen just wandered out of the blue, like they just
Oh,
came from, and it was like, the Lord providing to help them build the church. And so they made us, so like that history and that story is enshrined in the building itself, um and like we've been seeing like that's what we need to do in our life together. So like so we've been progressively building different parts of our buildings and trying to make them more beautiful and more symbolically sound, right? Of the history of things. So one of them that we just did not too long ago was our laundry room had been run down. It was a very old cabin off to the side, and it's got washers and dryers in there, and everybody goes in and has a certain schedule of when they can come use the washers and dryers, right? Um, and we, you know, uh, we realized like this needs to be a beautiful place. Like you spend a lot of time here, so like we spend a lot of time architecting, and it's this beautiful, and it has like it's like kind of in the kind of old red schoolhouse kind of motif, and it's got a big tower on it, and then we have like this beautiful Christian artwork, the I'm totally blanking what the name of the artwork is now. But I think it's the Annunciation to Mary, or
mm,
whatever, on the wall and everything. So you see that when you come in to do your laundry, right, and fold your clothes and all that. And it's just beautiful. It has these really beautiful doors that we put on there and everything. And like that's the laundry room, right? Like most of the times, the laundry room is just like, it's kind of beat up and dingy, but
afterthought,
we're like
yeah.
realizing like, no, like this is a place where we spend so much of our life, and we need to put these Christian symbols and this artwork and stuff to remind us what we're doing when we're going to do the laundry, right?
Mm.
And so like, and so we're just looking for more and more opportunities, and trying to figure out how to do it, and we can't build like full stone cathedrals just yet. I don't know. We don't. Finances aren't infinite, but like, but how, we're looking at like how can we do that kind of thing to be having around us day in and day out the reminder of the story that God has called us into. And another way that you're talking about, like with being part of that story in the liturgical calendar too, is, and like what I was saying about those oxen being part of the cathedral, what we've tried to do too is like remind ourselves of our own history together. So what we have every year in like September, um, we have a history night where we
Mm.
remember how God called us together, right? And our own history. And one of the things we do is because if you remember, I said that people came on the property and were trying to block them. So they literally couldn't get to their homes. Like they had to sleep in like the offices because
Mhm.
they couldn't get back to where they were staying. So we come together on history night. We have a meal. We usually order Chick-fil-A because we're Christians, so you gotta order Chick-fil-A if you're Christians. And you know, and that the reason we order out, we don't just make the meal, is, and we actually have this like liturgy that we do where someone says, you know, one of the children says, "Father, why are we, you know, ordering our meal?" You know, this kind of thing. And because the reason is because we didn't have time to make meals then. We had to like order out food and just get what you could, because there was this intense, you know, pressure and persecution going on to like keep us from actually being a body, right?
Mm.
And then what we all do is we all in our dining room area, we all sleep overnight there. So all the mattresses, you know, inflatable
Yeah.
mattresses come out, and people set up chairs and stuff, and we all sleep together overnight to remind us, because we weren't able to sleep in our rooms, right?
Mm.
And so like I like it's
It's
not, so
embodied. You
we're
embody
part
it,
of, yeah, we embody it.
the history.
And yeah, as we're going liturgically through the year, we're going through the Christian calendar, right? But then also God is working in each body's own life, right? There's a, you know, like sometimes I feel like when you hear people talking about like theology and stuff, like all those principles really matter, right? But I feel like Paul Vanderklay has hit on this a bit too, like when he's talked about like the differences between his theology and Pageau's or different things, and how much, you know, what matters there, right? But one thing that really matters is how the Holy Spirit's calling you, like your own personal history with following Christ, right? And so like you have to keep that in mind as well, right? Like I've had people say to me like, you know, "Oh, why don't you guys, you know, you guys should become Catholics or something," you know, like someone else say something like that, right? But like that's coming from a good place, absolutely, right? But like they almost don't realize, like you realize you're not just calling me to be a Catholic, you're calling to 30 other people to be Catholic at the same
Yeah.
time, right? And we have a history where the Holy, like we've prayerfully sought the Holy Spirit and been led on a certain path, and maybe we should become Catholics. Maybe that's in the cards, but it's not, so it's not a light thing, right? Like it's you know, and what that needs to be taken not just in the context of, oh, is the Catholic the right thing or not, but you know, like where is the Holy Spirit calling you, and what has your journey with Christ been, you know? And I love that we have that tradition of like incorporating these other elements, where we know this happened on this date. God called us. He did something in our midst, right? And it wasn't. It's not just people made it up. It's not just. It was exciting. Like the Holy Spirit was moving. Let's remember that, and remember that the Holy Spirit is still leading us and moving, right?
Mm. Yeah, there's that kind of the idea of subsidiarity. I don't know if you've heard like Jordan Peterson talk about that at all, but like
Yes. Oh yeah, we're big. Yeah, we've definitely.
like these concentric realities of where you build from.
Yeah.
And that's what that sounds like to me. You know, there is this kind of universal church, Catholic church, little c, you know, Catholic church or whatever. There's this also your maybe the churches in your city or something. And then there's the church you go to. And then there's also your family, or maybe even like churches that do like small group or something. And so there is like this hierarchy of
Mhm.
of meaning to what it means to be the church or a church, like you're saying. And just it sounds like um where your community and your church has found itself is made those distinctions, well, some way more deeply, in a way.
Yeah.
And so um and it was making me think about this, because even your story about the ox on the decorative oxes on this cathedral, I guess somewhere in Europe, with that story, well, that was contextual to, that wasn't about Rome, that wasn't
Yeah.
about some other thing. It was
Yeah.
about that community. And we have to also go back and to think about, of course, you know, you're in a pretty large metropolitan area, very large metropolitan area. But it's like
Well, we're in southern New Jersey, so it's more
Oh,
rural
maybe
down
not.
here.
Okay, so
Yeah, yeah. It's the northern New Jersey is all the crazy overspill from New York, but
okay,
yeah,
okay.
it's a little bit better down here.
But
Yeah.
but it's what makes me think about, and I've toyed around in this thought in my mind. I was like, well, what was it like to be in a community that had 1, 2, or 3 churches for, several thousand people?
Yeah.
Like what that world was like and what trust was like within those communities. Not quite as deep or as committed as what what y'all are doing, but that there is there's still a lot more going on there in how life was ordered and everything shut down on a Sunday type thing, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, totally.
And and I, we can't necessarily go back. We may be forced to go back at some point in certain ways, but
Yeah.
but
And maybe we don't even aren't supposed to go back necessarily, because maybe going back means just imbibing the same problems that got us to where we are now.
sure. And
Yeah.
and I don't know, using where we're at today, which kind of leads me into the other parts of your Twitter bio. Like, so you're in web development and you have interests in crypto.
Yeah.
How do those synthesize into what you're doing in y'all's life and your community?
Well, it pays bills, so having a career is good. The it's I so I've been into web development, I mean, ever since I was uh, 16, 17. Uh so we have our own school, and all our kids go to that school. My wife teaches in the school, and everything. And what we do is we add a 13th year onto the end, which is more like a vocational year for the student to kind of discover what they're interested in, right? And kind of like learn about how to have a career, and how to learn useful skills that take you forward in life. And so I did web development. My dad is really into computers and stuff, so I got a lot of that kind of technology and programming, all that stuff from him.
Hmm.
Um, and where it started is uh, for our window cleaning pressure washing company, we had a need to like organize all the customers, schedule them, and all that kind of stuff. And my dad wrote software for it. Early on, he just like wrote it in the evenings, like on his own time, trying to figure it out. And then I took that over and started coding that. And so like I'd be doing window cleaning on the side a couple days, then come back, and then I'd be reading stuff, to learn how to code, and then come back and work on the software that we use and stuff. So that was like my genesis of it's like, we have a need. This software needs to be coded. We need to run the business. I'll learn how to do that, right? And then it just kind of progressed from there. I really have a proclivity for software and coding and everything. And so now, I mean, it's developed. One blessing of COVID was working remote is much more acceptable, especially in the software development area, right? So before, my options were limited to my area around me. But that's been a real blessing of oh, there's things I can do now for company. I was working for a company in Texas for a while. Now I work for a company that doesn't actually have offices anywhere. Everybody's remote.
Wow.
And it's a crypto gaming company. They're working on a game in the crypto space. I've done a bunch of stuff with smart contracts and things. And right now I'm the director of engineering for them. So I have a few developers underneath me and stuff. So yeah, it's been interesting. It's the crypto spheres. It's like 95% scams, but then there's like a 5% in there that's like kind of some interesting ideas and stuff, and there's some kind of element of it where people are like kind of trying to immanentize the eschaton, say, right? You're trying to bring about the, which,
The transition from
you know,
fiat to Bitcoin or whatever.
yeah, of like, there's this kind of like a lot of crypto people is like, if we can only just decentralize everything and just make everything trustless, then everything will work good,
Mm.
and kind of like the libertarian idea a little bit too. It's like, we just got rid of all the rules and everybody just was, able to do their own thing. Everything would be great, And it's like, yeah, you don't know the depth of the human heart, you know, like we'll find some way to corrupt everything, you know.
The old
So
original sin theology.
yeah, but I think there's real merit to some of the ideas of like having this decentralized idea and at least not being in the hands of governments somewhat. But yeah, who knows? You know, I don't know. It's interesting.
It
But
is.
it also pays the bills, so that's great.
Yeah, that's always nice.
Yeah.
I've been for probably, I don't know, 4 years. It began to like learn what at least the ideas behind, well, Bitcoin more specifically, but then this cryptography, and then how that process worked for Bitcoin.
Yep.
And you obviously know that everyone's kind of you can just copy that and then kind of go do whatever you want with it, and that's what the rest of it is. But to a degree, and then there's the difference between proof of work and
Proof of stake.
proof of stake. So then it's like, but the thing you hit on is like, oh well, if the crypto bros or whoever is like, oh, if we can just fix trust here, then everything will be fixed. And I think it would fix something.
Yeah.
But if we're human, like you're pointing to, so there still has to be this. We have to build relationship. Like it can't. It's not going to fix everything. It might fix some problem. Hopefully it would. Hopefully it will fix some problems, I guess. And I think it might. But
yeah.
But yeah, it's not everything. But I think it is a piece. I think it's a piece of a hopeful future. Maybe. I don't know.
What I think so. Yeah. No, definitely. I think there's something there, but yeah. Ultimately, yeah. I wonder. I haven't really talked about this or articulated it much, so what comes out might be a little off the cuff and weird. But it's like, but I think through what they were saying during the conference about sacrifice being integral, right? And that's how we live our life here in my community, right? It's like, the greater amount of sacrifice that you give to others, the more meaning comes from, and I think that's also, trust too, and so it almost seems like crypto might be at the same time trying to say, you can have all the benefits of trust and relationships without sacrifice, or something along those lines, like me, like, and sacrifice of the kind, which is like I'm not sacrificing so that I can receive, right? I lay my life down with no thought that this is going to work out equally for me, right? Like there's nothing that I'm going to do, like you can't have a concept of understand fair in a community like this, like you can't, be like, am I putting in the exact amount of work as someone else? Is that really, is it, like it like there's wisdom in saying like, okay, if, this person's burning themselves out and that person is, like, let's try to, accommodate for that, and stuff. But if you're measuring all the time, it doesn't work. It just does not work. It becomes, you get less, right? The more greedy you become, right? The more, it's the pouring your cup out, right? Your cup will overflow, but you have to pour it out, like the scriptures say, right? And so I do wonder if there's something maybe fundamentally, problematic there in crypto to some extent too, like there's got to be some level of, I just, you can't, it's all going to be supported by people at the end of the day, right? Like, if like I work on Ethereum a lot because that's where all the smart contracts are and stuff.
Yeah.
But if a Vitalik Buterin dies tomorrow, like that's going to really tank the price of Ethereum, like I don't, and it might never recover from that. I don't know, like, but it's the most decentralized one besides Bitcoin, like, so
that kind of speaks to the interesting fact or part of Bitcoin is having the myth that doesn't have a person behind it. Or
that is very interesting about Bitcoin, how Nakamoto just, started it and then just disappeared
Created
and no one knows,
a myth,
which is,
and like,
that's kind of cool. Yeah.
but that's actually the different, because I wonder, I guess, just kind of batting back and forth on this is, if it would allow for trust to be built deeper on other things than having to maybe, at least in exchange, and also in the fact that we still, um, well, for the time being, exist in kind of a global network,
Yeah.
in how things operate. So, and that's, but anyways, what was on the last part of your bio? What's the UX? Is that the game thing that you're talking
Oh, that's
about?
stands for user experience. That's just,
Oh, okay.
like, so I tend to
Shorthand.
be, I consider myself a full stack developer, what they say, and it probably means nothing to somebody who isn't in the industry. But there tends to be this bifurcation when you're looking at a software. You go to a website, there's the front end and the back end. The front end would be the buttons that you're clicking on, and then the back end is like all the logic on the servers that runs whenever you do something and click a button. So I tend to specialize. I've specialized on the front end. I do the whole thing, but the front end's the most interesting part to me, where you get to do all the animations and make the thing that you experience as the end user feel good, right? So that's what user experience is, right? So
Gotcha.
yeah, I probably should update. I don't know. That's,
Update
I
the
don't know. I had to
bio.
put something in the bio there. It's like, yeah, I don't know if that totally fits anymore, but I mean, it's definitely a big part of what I do and what I like and interested in.
Man, well, that's it's interesting how all these things though are working together, like the decentral. I mean, the fact that you're able to do that, how that world's being built, how it
Yeah.
integrates it, like it's almost like it is allowing y'all to build your trust maybe in a certain way, like support y'all the trust of what y'all are doing.
Yeah. Well, I do think, because like I do feel like maybe society needs to, like, Edmund Burke talks about the little platoons, right? Of society, and like needing those for society to function well. Like I think it feels like, I guess I think what I feel like is like crypto is that's like a good layer, right, between all these different communities, right, to deal with things. But you do need, but in order for that layer isn't just not going to work if everybody's these bifurcated individuals, like,
Yeah.
and so you need that hierarchy and that stack of tightly knit communities, I think,
Have
in
you
order
heard
for.
have you heard the Bitcoin monastery thing? Have you heard that term?
Oh, okay, yes, I saw that somewhere. I don't remember
It
where I
was on
saw it. It might have
The
been
show
on.
highlighted it a month ago or something.
Oh, okay, I might have seen that thumbnail, but I didn't get a chance to like watch it or
So
whatever.
I couldn't quite. I think it's making more sense to me now because I don't think that it's actually fully about the idea of just Bitcoin, but like it's the idea that there are these strong communities
Yeah,
that are like these network nodes that
yeah,
it like is you're connected. These monasteries
yeah,
can have a trust between them, like high value trust, but because of things
yeah.
like smart contracts or things like
Hmm.
Bitcoin, that might be able to enhance the ability to have network. Well, I think Jordan Hall's talking about, I don't know, he probably has a source for this, but it's like network communities.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, that's interesting. I'll have to look at that. That's fascinating. The thing is that you got to know where that boundary is, right? Because if I deployed, my company's looking, we're looking to deploy, we're investigating, like the chains, and you can deploy these L2 chains on top of other chains and stuff. And it's really interesting. But um you like, if I were to deploy my own chain for our community, right? It's like, okay, now everybody has everything. That would just destroy our community because like that's like, now you're saying I can't trust you, right? I
Mm,
need this really strict system in place in order to commune with you, right?
mm,
And that destroys communion, right? Now, you do need you need orderly systems, right? But you want it, like, especially when you're closely knit, you want to be able to have systems where you don't have to have the rule of law so tightly between people, where there's space for people to give each other grace and to
Mm.
work through things, right? And if you just keep building so many rules, right?
Code, coding the
Yeah, and
existence.
yeah, then you get into this kind of pietistic mode where you're just trying to follow all the rules, right? And it's like, no, the whole point is us to love each other, right? Like, I need to learn how to love, Betty or Margie or or John or these different people in my community, right? And the rules and the law gets in the way of that often, right?
Mm.
If you're too rigid, right? But if you have nothing, then you don't have a system to function in. So so you have to understand where that level is. And I feel like society, it's basically just two polar extremes, right? Where you have the government, right, which
Mhm.
will has all and that's why like doing your taxes is so painful, right? Because they have guns, they can come and
Mm.
take you, um but and then it's just the individual, right? Me living in my house, that's it, and there's
Yeah,
nothing in between,
yeah.
right? you
That's
know
broke down.
and
Yeah.
like and you saw that like break down severely with COVID, right? And nobody even be able to go to church. But I think even like what we a lot of people call their church at this point, it isn't enough of that in between that and government, like it's
Yeah.
just
It kind of
uh,
falls one way or the other. It's almost like it falls one way or the other.
yeah,
And
exactly.
I
The
one
Yeah,
thing I
yeah,
would posit to this idea to play a little like thought experiment is,
yeah.
so I mean, the fact that you and we met briefly, I mean, we probably talked less than 5 minutes.
I know.
and and then we're here talking an hour
Yeah.
and a half, and like the building of trust, like but what I think is interesting is, so what you and your monastery have developed into 2 generations now, working on, I guess, on a third. I mean, are you
Mhm.
around 40 or something, getting close?
uh yeah, well, we're
No, how old
I
are
think
you?
we're like,
How old are you is what I mean.
how old? I was thinking head count. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I always have to remember. I think I'm 36.
Yeah,
I
you're getting close to
forget.
40. Yeah, so the
Yeah.
second generation of people, and um so what you're doing, very countercultural, very, very countercultural. Have rediscovered, and in a certain way, maybe that's part of the revival, that the a seed of this revival is that you rediscovered a way that's actually, not directly connected to the larger institutions of the Christian church, to cultivate deep trust. And a big part of that is actually, I would assume, the finances. Like you said, that was like probably the most radical nature, is the shared purse.
Yeah.
And so, in a world where people or society is forced to rediscover the things that y'all have been already have learning into a third generation, um, there might be people that need to learn from y'all, and need to learn from the deep strength that y'all have cultivated and over
Mhm.
time, and how
Yeah.
to do that. And I could see how, because the trust would have to be built over time, because say, I'm states away, something like that. And so things like these decentralized rails for contracts, and these decentralized way to exchange, um, money could, I mean, because there is a level of transparency. There's a level of transparency within the
Mhm.
blockchain and stuff. So it's like, I could see how that, even though from your vantage point, like within your community, you could see how that could erode trust, erode the need for a certain trust. But
Yeah.
but in another, but where how do you? Because I kept coming back to this idea. I kept forgetting in this conversation, but that, you can't scale that kind of strength in, if your community got past 150 the Dunbar principle, like
Mhm.
it doesn't work.
Mhm.
There's a point where it breaks down regardless.
Mhm.
So, however, with what we have happening right here is the ability to scale for the first time, maybe many,
Yeah.
many smaller, higher trust communities, higher strength building communities, uh,
Yeah.
where, and those could be tools that could be helpful for that, like I was saying, like financial and contractual tools. But that has been one of the thing that, well, even in this little corner conversations of like, well, what's going on here, and these players and stuff is like, wow, that can these things scale past relationally? You can't, but
Yeah.
notally, like, well, you can, and of course that there are ideas about that around the church that have existed for a long time, but what hasn't existed is the ability to do what we're doing right now,
Yes.
is actually face to
Absolutely.
face conversation, long form. I mean, we could write letters, we could write emails, we could tweet at each other. It's not the same,
Yeah. Yeah.
I do think it affords a certain type of building of trust. As opposed, it's a layer on top of trust building, at least.
I
So,
think so. No, I think you're right. Yeah. And like I've been fascinated with the little corner and wanting to, yeah, connect with more people in it too, because it feels like there's a lot of people, I don't know, thinking the same way that my body has been thinking, and thinking about these topics, because they're hard topics. Like,
yeah,
it's not easy for sure.
they're problems.
Um,
They're perennial problems.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, yeah, so, but I was been thinking about, like, I think those little nodes in the little corner, like you're saying, can be an encouragement to each other too, to like, to help, like to reinforce that lower layer, right? Like, not, because it can't, like you're saying, like, it can't be, you have to realize what it's not, right? Like, and that's what the lesson that we've all learned from social media is, like, that ain't community. Like,
Yeah.
it's like, and everybody wants to have a community, right? It's like, oh, my
Yes.
community, and like, my YouTube community. Like, that's not community, right?
Mhm.
Community is when things go bad for you, people stick around and help. Like,
Who's left?
that's, yeah, exactly. The community, I mean, YouTube community. I just, like, I click subscribe, unsubscribe. Like, I'm bored. Unsubscribe. That was some community I had there. And I know there's a little bit more of, like, talking to each other online stuff, but, like, it's got to be embodied. It's got to
Yeah.
come down. Like, to me, like, something's wrong if I don't show up on time at our morning meeting, right? Where we all read the scriptures together. Like, that's embodied. It doesn't get more embodied than that.
Mm.
And like, everybody's like, where's Tim? Right. And we have like an accountability system, even, where we're like, if someone's going to be absent or something, we post it on our Slack group and stuff, to say, hey, I'm out, or I'm sick, or, these kind of things. It's, I have real commitments that mean my body can't be here,
Relational.
even though I'm, like, a homebody, and I'll sit in front of my computer all day if you don't tell me not to. Like, I've got to do something. I've got to go walk, a decent
Touch
distance from here.
grass.
Yeah, I got to touch grass, to go be with my people.
Yeah.
And so, but I think, like, the little corner, we need to encourage all of us, like, figure out what are those things in our life of how we can, I think the word I was thinking about lately is entanglement, right? Like, that seems to me like a decent word of, like, describing the problem of, like, right now in society, we optimize for being the least entangled with people possible.
Yes.
It's, everything should be as modular as possible, and you can pick up and go wherever you need to, right? Like, even to the point where you don't get married, right? Because I don't know if this is going to work out. We can live together, but I don't know if I want to make vows, because what if it doesn't work out? Like, I should optimize for being able to plug and play myself into whatever my passions so desire,
Hyper
within
individualistic. Yeah.
hyper individualistic. So, what are we going to do to combat that, right? Well, you got to go the opposite direction. You got to say, this is hard. It's gonna be hard to get out of this, right? Or at least, so some like it isn't simple to get out of it, right? Like, it means something, right? And like I think a lot of church and stuff is it's fairly simple to leave your church, like you can just drive to the other one, you can go move to your new job or something, but
to that point,
yeah,
is where I have found myself was there was a temptation, or I say temptation, there was a tendency for a few people to just be like, oh, I got to go find my other church. And this one just, and I resisted that for multiple reasons, but was like, I needed to grieve.
Yeah.
And just hopping in and just pretending like something didn't happen.
Yep.
Is not healthy.
Totally.
And I invited a group of people to grieve together, actually, because they at a loss that we were all tangled up together in, that when you tear something like that apart, it's painful. And so I think that there's a lot to what you're obviously saying. I've really enjoyed this conversation, and
me too.
And I look forward to kind of continuing to build trust with you and learn more about what you're doing there. And I hope that getting you out here and the 10 or 15 people that'll, watch the premiere and the people that trickle in afterwards will maybe really be interested and want to connect with more of those ideas as well. But man, thank you for being here with me today. I'm going to close this thing down, hit the video, and then we'll end this thing backstage if that's all right.
Sounds great.
All right. Thanks, Tim. Hi, this is Christian Baxter, and you're listening to Yours Truly, a place we go to think out loud.